I'm Kendra Burton. In this tape, we'll be doing one complete oil painting step by step from start to finish. Remember, one of the best ways to learn by video is to watch the tape entirely through first, taking notes as needed, and then go through a second time as you do your painting, stopping to review as often as you like. Also, if you adjust the color on your TV set to create natural flesh tones, you should be able to get an accurate color reproduction to help in mixing your paint colors. Today, we are doing a painting called the Misty Green Forest. The forest has always been a place of natural beauty. The physical dimensions of this canvas emphasize the tall, surrounding, sheltering trees. The sun warmly glowing through the mist lightens the forest floor. This draws you in to discover this quiet and secluded place. Now, the first thing we need to do before we begin painting is to make sure you have the supplies you need. And once you have the necessary supplies, you can now prepare your canvas layout. I've pre-sketched the layout here with a light wash of thinner with a touch of ultramarine blue. You may simply use a pencil to sketch it on at home if you'd like. Basically, it's a very simple layout. All we do is choose where the horizon is going to come, and of course where this is this tall, it's actually very low, maybe only about 4 inches from the bottom. So put in your horizon line and then sketch in a few trees. I've put in 3 main trunks, and the rest of the little twigs and branches we'll put in later on. So that's basically all you need to do for your layout. And after you've completed that part of your canvas layout, then you can now prepare your palette colors. First of all, we're going to start with titanium white. And you need quite a bit of this color, and sometimes when you squirt this out, it's fairly stiff, so you may want to mix a little linseed with this white, as I have done here, to make it somewhat more creamy. Then the next color that we're using is cadmium yellow medium. You'll need to make sure that you do get the medium tone of this, because this color will come, cadmium yellow comes in a light, medium, and a deep tone. Next color is yellow ochre. Then on to cadmium red light. You really don't, or cadmium red medium we're using. You don't really need very much of this. Then alizarin crimson, burnt sienna. This is kind of our reddish brown. Then we'll go on to burnt umber. This is quite a dark brown. In fact, this almost looks black on your palette, but this is a very dark brown. Then viridian green, I think, is such a beautiful green. It's almost, I'll pull this out a little bit, it's almost like a deep, deep bluish green. And then the next color is ultramarine blue, and the last one is called cerulean blue. I'm going to put this over there just in case we need that. Okay, now once you have the necessary palette colors, you can now begin your mixing. First of all, we'll start by an off-white, and this is a fairly simple color because we'll just take a little of this white over into our palette and then put a touch of yellow with it. Now you need to make sure your touch is very, very small amount. Just a little tiny, tiny bit on the tip of that palette knife is going to really bring the color into this white to make it an off-white quickly. So you don't need very much yellow. Then the next color we're going to mix is a yellow color. Here again we use the same colors, just a little bit different combination. Picking up some more white. And this time you can use more yellow because you want it to be a more yellow mixture. We may need just a little bit more paint than that. As you're mixing, a lot of times it's easier to mix a little bit more than you'll be needing because it's easier to mix more than to have to come back later and try to match that color. This yellow actually is a fairly light yellow, so you may need to judge that as you're mixing, not to get it too deep of a yellow color. It's really quite light. Okay, the next color that we're going to mix up is called the Misty Blue. Now this one has a whole bunch of colors in it, starting with titanium white, going to put that in first, and then we'll move on to cerulean blue and ultramarine blue. So we're going to take both of our blues, put a little bit of this in it. That's ultramarine blue. Here's cerulean blue, the kind of turquoise one. And then a little bit of viridian green. You use almost every color in this pile. Viridian green, burnt sienna, and cadmium yellow. Now we'll stir that around and see if we can't come up with something that looks kind of like a misty blue color. I know this has a lot of colors in this one, and sometimes this is kind of difficult to get. If you find that it's not quite as true, if you need it to be more blue, then you can add a couple of your blue colors as needed. Okay, we'll just kind of stir that around. Actually, this blue is a little bit on the green side. I'm going to take this and pull it just a little, kind of thin so you can see this a little closer. Even though it's kind of blue, you'll see that it actually, I mean kind of green, you'll see that it actually is bluer once mixed up the next color, which is a misty green color. Let's take a little bit more blue before we go on. This one does take a fair amount of time to mix, I know, because we have so many colors that go into this combination. Okay, then the next color that we mix up is really, really similar in that it has several colors that go into it. This is called our misty green color. We'll take some titanium white. And then viridian green on into ultramarine blue, cerulean blue. So we'll grab both of those blues there. And then cadmium yellow medium and a little bit of burnt sienna. I try to give you these colors in the order of the greatest amount to the least amount of paint used. In other words, if I say start with white, you actually use mostly white, and then for this color, for instance, if I say the next color is viridian, you'll actually use the next greatest amount of viridian colors. You're mixing this up. Now to me that's fairly green, but I want the green to actually be a little bluer. So I'm going to dip into, I'll just take both of my blues. This color is kind of almost one that I've heard termed a foam green color. So it's actually a fairly blue-green and fairly green-blue as we mix these two colors. Okay, that looks good to me. Now we're going to get ready to paint before we go on to mix the other colors. So we will pick up the Filbert bristle number 4. And this is kind of flat. It's fairly stiff because it's made out of bristle, and it's rounded at the tip. Okay, now we're going to take the off-white and go right into where your sun comes right behind the tree, which is right in this very area where this branch is coming out. So I'm just going to pull kind of almost a rounded area where the sun is glowing behind that tree. This may be a little bit difficult to see at this point because we're on a white canvas, but in a minute when I do the yellow, you'll be able to see where that white comes. Let's see, you want to make this maybe a little bit bigger than you want it finally, because we're going to be working in some yellows around here. Then the next color that we're dipping into is the yellow mixture. This is going next to the white in just kind of a circular fashion right now before we blend. You can extend this out about so far. As you're painting, if you need to, I'll show you here on the palette, if you need to dip into a little bit of oil to make this a little thinner, you can. Here we're using a mixture of half linseed oil and half thinner, odorless thinner, for our medium, which I'll simply just refer to as oil as we're painting. So get a little bit of oil if you feel like it's too stiff when you're painting. Okay, so there's our yellow, and you don't have to keep, this is really not the sun, it's actually the sun glow, so it doesn't have to be a real specific round shape as far as that white goes. Once you've kind of come in here a little closer, we may switch to a larger brush just simply to cover a bigger area more quickly. Extend it just a little bit past this tree on the left. Okay, now after I lay that on, then I'm going to do a little bit of a soft blend between the yellow and the off-white. As you blend this, you can kind of come in perpendicular to the canvas, which means you're just kind of straight on, just stirring a little bit. That way it just makes it kind of easily blend from the light into the other yellow color. Same process over on this side. Just a little bit of a stir. I'm not pushing very hard here, too. That may make a difference. Okay, the next color that we're going to work into, if you'll come back to the palette with me, is the color that we call our Misty Blue. And we'll start with this smaller brush, but like I say, we may switch to a larger brush depending on whether or not we want to start going a little quicker on our canvas. Now that blue looks fairly dark to me. If when you're painting you think, boy, that might be a little too dark, or I don't quite like that color, it doesn't match my living room or whatever your reason, you may want to lighten it up just a little bit. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to add a little bit more white with that color, with my Misty Blue. Just create a little bit lighter blue. I think that will a little bit better on our canvas, maybe a little bit more white. Okay, I'm going to switch to a larger brush, which is the Filbert bristle number. It's a bristle bright. That just tells us simply the shape, that it's square across the top. Number 12, dipping into that lighter blue, and then back onto the canvas. I still feel like I want that area to be a little lighter. I'm going to just dip into some of the off-white to put a little bit lighter touch in this area so it's capturing that glow of the sun coming out here. This is your Misty Blue color that we're using now. I know this blue is kind of green, and like we mentioned, the green is actually kind of blue, but you'll see the difference when I put the green on, that it actually is more of a Misty Blue. And we're just going to really work this in. You may need to dip into some of your oil as you're painting so that it goes more quickly, sinks right down into that canvas. See how quickly that goes in. Working your way up to the top. Kind of losing paint. Dip in. Don't hesitate to reload your brush if you need to. Also, it may appear to be a little bit greener because it picks up some of the yellow sometimes. Now you do want to make sure you come over where your branches are going to be, at least to the outlining layout lines of your tree, so that you don't have little patches of white between the color and the branch on your canvas. Okay, maybe just a little bit more down in here of our blue. This really does create a neat mood where you've got the combination of a very light, glowing sun that works clear into these cool, misty colors around the edge. Okay, now I'm going to go into the other color that's called our misty green, and you will see that it will appear to be a little bit more green than this blue is. Put this on. I know they're fairly similar because we used a lot of the same colors. Still using our large Bristle Bright number 12. Really just scrub that in. Now I'm going to leave some area at the top of the canvas right in here, even as I do the lighter green. I'll leave some area blank so that that can be where we put the darker green. Because it's so dark, you actually don't want too much light underneath that area. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're painting, to leave that top blank, and I'll show you a little bit more of that when we get there. Okay, so we're just working around these trees. Here was our misty green. And you can come over to this edge pretty much. In fact, you can just take it right off the canvas if you need to. When you have a painting like this, sometimes it will remind several people of places they've been. And actually, this could be several different places around the world, maybe somewhere that you've been, may remind you of something. A little bit more green. Let's see, we'll just kind of take this right down to this piece of land in here. Kind of almost reminds me of Germany a little bit, where it's so green a lot of the time. Okay. Like I say, we'll leave that blank up toward the top so that you can come back and put those darker colors in. Now I'm just going to kind of block in the path. I'm dipping into my oil as I need to. With this misty green, I'm just going to leave kind of a little bit of an indication where the top of that is. Extend that over past these little mounds of grass. Okay, sometimes it's easy to forget little areas in here, but we do want to kind of go right in there because that takes that little opening back into it. If you find there are little areas where you need to get into a little bit more specifically, you can always switch to a smaller brush if you need to. Okay, now I'm going to do a little bit of a blend with my Filbert Bristle number 4. And I'm going to take a little bit more white off my palette and kind of work that in around the glowing sun. This gives it kind of a sculptured, broken look, almost as if there really are kind of leaves just very, very faintly back in there. Now, if you feel like you've lost your off-white, you may want to tilt your brush down so that you can replace that, just in case it gets lost a little bit, because you do want to create that off-white glowing sun effect. Okay, so now we're just kind of almost stirring in some of this white so that it softens it, gives it a real misty feel. We're going to do this process through all of our colors that we've already put on, just kind of making them broken a little bit. Sometimes when you go to the photographers, they'll have the backgrounds that are called sculptured or molded backgrounds, and that's kind of the same effect that we're trying to get here. A little bit more in this area. Okay, now we're just kind of going to maybe stir and pull, intermingling these two colors. This again will give it the misty effect of leaves growing. If, when you're painting, you feel like you've eliminated something, say if you end up getting too much blue over into your yellow, or too much yellow maybe way down in here into your blue, you can always add a little bit as you're painting. That's still okay. See, I'm just kind of scrubbing around, getting a little, just really kind of broken color effect in here. Still using the filbert bristle number 4, which of course is flat but rounded at the tip. Now you kind of want to work your way around even the areas that you've already done so that you can get that really molded kind of look. Now I'm going to be adding just a little bit of white, or off-white, even into some of these areas, even into the blues and greens. So we get that really misty impression of those leaves way back in the distance. Now see right here, you may feel like you're coming a little too much into that yellow, and if you do, what you can do is just go back into your yellow, and a lot of times if you need to lay this on, the angle of your brush will make a difference. If you get that too blue, just simply lay it down instead of going straight in like we do when we're scrubbing. You can lay this down and the paint will stay on. If you try to go straight in, sometimes it's difficult because then it will pick up the color, but if we do this, we can pretty well lay that down. Just kind of scrubbing. You can be really free with this one. You really don't have to worry about this stroke too much. Just enough to give it a really sculptured kind of broken up look. See, you don't really have to do a whole lot of... Okay, now you don't have to do that down here in the path, of course, because we'll come back later with some palette knife work in there. Okay, then I want to add just a little bit more white in there. May need to clean our brush. As I'm cleaning this, I'm using the cleaning jar, and it has a little spring in the bottom of it, or a little metal type of arrangement so that it lets the paint sink to the bottom. So I'm going to clean that out, take just a little bit more white. I really want to make the emphasis on this glowing sun. does that shine? Okay, now after you've done that, we're going to use a real fun brush that's called our blender. And if you look at the palette here, I've got this really soft hair blender, and this is different from a bristle brush or a sable because this one is very, very soft, and it's made out of kind of rabbit hairs. It sheds, it does shed quite a bit, but it is just the most wonderful brush for getting really smooth, soft blends. And so I'm going to go back to the canvas and start with the lightest area. It's a real soft hair blender, and it's may remind you of a toaster, the toaster type of a. When I say blender brush, I know some people start to maybe think of food, some kind of milkshakes that they mix up maybe. See how that softens that? Sometimes it's hard to tell when you're viewing this on your television that it's getting a real soft effect, but as you paint, you'll learn to love this brush. I think this brush is really, really neat for seascapes, for softening anything that's misty, any kind of water, and skies, especially good for skies. So we'll just kind of work our way down. Kind of all around the canvas. I know this is a good-sized canvas, and we do kind of cover all of it, simply because of the process of this light glowing effect. We always start with the lighter colors in the center and then work our way out. I'm just softening this. It's a pretty good-sized canvas. This is a 15 by 30 inch. Just softening. Now see, I'm going kind of circular, and then as you finish off, you may want to go back and forth just a little bit. I'm not real concerned about getting exactly over to the edge because we do come back in with a few side branches of the darker green color. And we really don't need to blend the path too much for the same reason that I told you before, because we do come back with palette knife on that one. Okay, now the next step is to do the brown tree trunks. And for this, we simply take our burnt umber. And see, this is quite stiff, so I'm going to pull it over into the middle and add some more linseed to that. That's pretty stiff. And this is kind of important to get it quite thin so it'll lay on. Otherwise it drags, and when something drags, it means it doesn't really sink right into the canvas. It just kind of stays on the top. And this is kind of important to get this right down into the canvas as you're doing these tree trunks. We may need a little bit more of that too. I'm going to take some more and make, ooh, I'll just kind of scoot that over. So you do want this kind of soupy, a little soupier than creamy. I know it's kind of hard to explain consistency sometimes this way, but it is really quite thin. And I'm going to take the brush that's called our Sable Flat number 10, and I'm going to dip right into that color. And I'll start with the largest tree trunk, starting at the bottom, and working my way up. Now these are pretty good-sized trees, and like I say, now sometimes you'll end up with a little white area that you just didn't quite overlap somewhere on the tree trunk, and if you do, you can wait till later and fill it in, or you can make your tree a little wider. So either way, there are some remedies to this in case it's not exactly as you like it. Now part of the reason we left these blank where the tree trunks are is so that we wouldn't run into wet paint. I know sometimes if I teach this in a weekly type workshop where we can do the background and then let it dry and come back in, a lot of times we just simply do the whole area that we just painted and come back over the top with trees. If that's more convenient with your painting time frame, you could do it that way too. So this is our soft sable, and it really lays that in there. You may want to even dip into some of your oil as you're painting so that it thins that a little bit more. Makes it seep into there, makes it go more quickly, and it also gives it a really nice crisp edge. See what a nice crisp edge that will give us. Now we're dragging just a little bit in there. extending down toward the roots of the tree. This one, I think it's kind of fun to make this kind of slant in there, and then you can extend it as the roots grow out. A lot of times when people are painting, they may come in and they think of trees as being straight, and so they'll do a straight tree and a straight tree, and the painting may not be quite as interesting as if they had a couple of little slanted ones, just to add variety. Okay, this does take a little bit of time to get this in. If you can remember just to dip into your medium, which is your oil mixture. Extending on up. Now you just kind of run it right off the top of the canvas. There. Kind of make a little crook in the tree if you want to, kind of bounce it over there a little bit. Like I say, sometimes to be not quite as straight makes it more interesting. Here we've got a little bit of a bend in the top of the tree here. You want to kind of try to make sure that the top is always thinner than the bottom. Sometimes they grow kind of funny, but generally that's a good principle to keep in mind. We may extend this just a little wider here. Okay, and then we'll bring off one of these branches. Another thing to keep in mind too that makes your painting better is as you're bringing branches off too, don't take them off from exactly the same point. In other words, don't take one off this direction if you've got one coming off at here, this direction from this point. You want to make it either higher or lower as you extend it off the other side. And you can kind of make a little bit of a branch separation up in here. And one thing that's good to remember too as you're doing these branches, I know sometimes when people start painting trees, they know that there's a place where it splits, and then they make 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 little separations, and so they get like little hands. And so I try to remind people to, if you're going to split it and branch it off, maybe come here like up in this area, split it into 2, and then maybe from one of those split again like that. And then that'll usually give you a kind of nice and more natural division in your branches. Okay, now that may be just about as much as we need to do on that basic larger tree trunk. We actually do come in with a few more little twigs and branches, but we can add those in a little later. Okay, now I'm going to go to the one on the left, the larger trunk. It's actually not that large, but I'm going to just pull this in here. Working your way up. Now this is still a little bit stiff. I want it to just sit in there so it'll move quickly. Maybe a little wider at the bottom, because as you get toward the top, of course, then you're thinning a little bit. You're making your size a little bit smaller. Now this one can kind of take a little bit of a division in here if you'd like. Maybe pull one little branch off like so. We may need to switch to a little bit smaller brush. It just depends on what kind of an edge we can get in here. Sometimes you start running into a little bit of wet paint that will make a difference. There we go. That pulled in a little joint there. And extend it, like I say, kind of divide it as you go. Okay, now the other little main branch over toward the right will do. Same color, we're using burnt umber. Pulling that from the bottom. There's our little root system in there. Extending on toward the top. Now see this, since we only blocked in, or sketched in at least the very bottom, you're going to run into some wet paint. Now a good principle to remember about painting wet paint over paint that's already wet is if you can add a little bit more of your oil to thin it out, the thinner paint will stick to the thicker paint that's wet. So I've added a little bit more of that, and now it should make it go a little darker. See, as it does. Very, very slender up in here. Now see, I'm turning my brush, so I'm getting the very chisel edge of this, number 10. That'll give you a nice fine line. Okay, now you may want to branch off a little bit, but as we do that, I'm going to trade brushes so that we can get a little bit more slender kind of branch. And for this, I'm going to use a sable number 4. It's a sable flat. I'm going to put a little bit more of this linseed in here, so as we're painting, we can get that nice and thin. Now I'm going to do these little tiny branches. We can start at the bottom and then work our way up. Here again, I'm using the chisel edge of this brush. If you find it's easier to control even a smaller brush, you can switch to your number 1 if you'd like to, your sable. You do want to keep a real soft brush as you do this. Okay, a few more little branches off here. Very tiny and small. And see, these don't have to show up really, really dark either. If they're that small, sometimes that mist is going to almost surround it, make it just really light with the sunlight. Make them kind of squiggly. You can be really squiggly if you'd like, depending on what kind of trees you have. Okay, maybe we'll pull a little branch off of the side of here. Now, as you get toward the light, see, you're maybe losing this. I don't know if you can see this very closely. You may not be able to see that very well. So if you need to dip in to a little bit darker, you can. I've got some more dark on my brush, and now I'm going to pull this up. Sometimes it's kind of nice to have it fade in the sunny area. But this one, we need to have just a little bit darker right in here. Okay, a few more branches. Let's kind of separate that one as we work on up. Oops, now, if you have this is one thing you really have to kind of keep track of too. If your tree is more in the foreground, it's closer to you, you want to make sure that you overlap the other one that's in back of it, like that right there. Or if it's in back, make sure it doesn't overlap the tree that's closer to you. Okay, I may touch this up just a little bit more so that it kind of is lightened by the sun. Especially when we're in wet paint, you can lighten it up easily if you just kind of pull into it. Okay, a few more little branches off this way. And like I say, it's okay if it kind of pulls in some of that wet paint and fades a little bit. Generally, you want your darker areas in the larger tree trunks anyway. Okay, a little branch off this area. Maybe something up in here. You can split it too if you'd like to. Sometimes it gets a little bit wider. We may have to put, if you get it too wide and you don't want to go back and fix it or mend it or anything, you can always just put a splash of some leaves up there, and then that takes care of it. Okay, we'll pull in a few more little twigs over at the right-hand side of our painting, starting at the bottom here. I'm still using the number 4, but if you'd like to, like I say, if you feel like you get a little bit more control, you may want to switch to the liner brush, which is the little number 1 sable. Kind of pull these out, just let them be really squiggly and kind of fun. Now you also can pull in some branches coming in this way, so we'll work with a few from there. And these, of course, will be coming from the trees that are all surrounding here, so they can come down. They don't have to work their way up either. Some of these can just be pulled right down into this. Now, as you lose your color, you may want to dip back in if you feel like you still need to maintain that darker color. I also sometimes find it handy to be able to balance or control my paintbrush if I just put my little finger over at the side. Okay, maybe a few more little branches in here. Okay, now the next thing that we're going to do is put in some dark green, so we'll need to mix that up. Okay, in our dark green, we use ultramarine. You want to have a ton of this color. We use just lots and lots and lots of it, so I'm going to squirt out some more of this blue. We're going to be doing those dark green grasses and leaves all around the outside. Okay, so we're starting with ultramarine blue. Now remember, that's the color that you use the most of. Then go into viridian green, burnt sienna, and I'm just going to take that whole pile of that. We just need lots and lots of this color. As we do this, we'll want to start painting our little pieces of land at the bottom, and then we'll work our way up. This is really, really a dark color. I know maybe on your set it may look almost like black. I'm not sure how that looks to you, but it is very dark. But now watch as I pull it out. So you should be able to see kind of a greenish look to it. Maybe a little bit more viridian. And I'm probably going to need to replace some of these other colors in case I need those. Those are burnt sienna. Now I'm going to mix some oil, just dip it right in with this one because I need to extend it quite a bit. Very, very dark green. And I hope I've got enough. Well, we'll try that if we need to add some more. We also work in some of the pure colors, and so we can add that if we need to. Okay, so there's our dark green. I'm going to just mix a few more colors so that we can go on. Our lavender path is one of the last things that we need to mix up. And in this color, we use ultramarine. This also, by the way, is kind of an optional thing. I think it just kind of adds a little color to the painting. Some people like to keep it almost more in the blues and greens, and so they don't go into this color. And so you can choose for yourself if you like this one. We're doing ultramarine blue. Then we'll take a little bit of alizarin crimson, maybe a touch of this red, and oh boy, we need a lot more white. Like I say, boy, when you do these paintings, you use just a ton of white. So I'm going to go into that white, maybe scoop my little cups over. That's really, really, really blue. We do want to have kind of a lavender color, so I'll take some of this Cadred Light. Then you want it kind of a lavender gray. I don't let this show up all that much. It's fairly subtle, so I'm going to add some more sienna to it. Maybe a little bit more white. Now see, like I say, it's really not, it's kind of a grayish lavender. It's not really a vivid, vivid lavender. A little bit more white, and then we'll move on. Okay, now you're going to grab the big brush that's our Bristle Bright number 12, and dipping into that dark. We're just going to go all around the canvas. We'll start at these little patches of grass at the bottom. And just block this in. I'm going to block this in, and then I'll texture it in a minute. And it's okay if you have a few little stragglers, maybe the bristles of the brush are kind of poking out and coming all over, but that's all right. This is kind of a little growing area that has lots of grass that goes all different directions, so it's okay. You work that in. I know this looks really dark to you. You may want to grab just a little bit more yellow to make it look a little greener. Kind of dirties up the yellow. Usually I'll mix with the palette knife in hand, but okay, now we're going to just finish blocking this in, and we'll work our way up and around with the darker greens. This dark green, we just kind of block. I know this looks really, really dark, but when you're working at home and you have a color that's a very, very deep green, then you should have it. Just kind of come right in there with that. You can overlap into the green, it'll lighten it up, but that's still okay. You're getting toward the sunny area, so it's all right if it does lighten up a little bit. Okay, over onto the right-hand side. Still using this big bristle bright. Now I'm just going to kind of touch in here. We're actually going to switch to a different brush to get some other leafy textures. This is just going to add a little bit of color. Maybe a little bit more up in here. Okay, now I'm going to switch brushes to a brush that's, to me, a fairly new shape. It's one called a tree brush. And I'll show that to you now so you can see how interesting and unusual that is. There's our tree brush. We're going to dip into the dark green, and then we're going to just touch this all around to create a real leafy look. Now you don't want to get too dark in toward here. We need to come back with a little bit of a yellow ochre mixture. Fairly solid around the edge. See, I'll just make it almost totally solid, the edges. And if you need to kind of lay it down to get a little bit more extended instead of round type shapes, you can do that. Just use the very side edge of it. Okay, extend a few of these over where the branches come out. Like I say, fairly solid over toward the edge. That is looking really like a forest that's going to give a lot of shelter, quiet. Okay, now that's about as much as you need to do with that color. We may just kind of texture up this grass down here a little bit more. Now I need to clean this brush out because it's so dark. I'm going to clean this out in my inner here. I'm going to mix up one other little color for some highlights, and this is really simple. In fact, you can almost just dip into it. I have cleaned out that tree brush so that it's a little bit cleaner because we've been in such dark color. And I'm just going to take a bit of white into this yellow ochre and just stir that around real quickly. And then we're going to use that as some highlights, kind of as the branches or as the leaves capture that light. Now as you're painting, you can put this on either before or after your green. Just remember, you need to keep this right in the very center areas. And we'll put a little bit of that on at this time. Just kind of touch on. This kind of gives a nice warmth in here. You can even put some of this yellow ochre mixture dotted into that blue and the misty green areas. That may be a little too vivid. I don't want it quite right there. A few more little lighter areas. Ooh, boy, this is looking good. If you are not able to find a tree brush, a fairly good substitute would be a fan brush to get this kind of effect. It's a little bit different shape, but it would work. Okay, now I'm going to kind of do a little bit of texture right here in the grass. Not very much. I've still just got that same brush, just enough to give it a little bit of a texture. Now the last little thing that I'm going to touch up with is I'm going to do the path, and then I'll do a few highlights on the trees. Okay, take your palette knife, and we're going to dip into the color we blocked in with, which is our green. Just kind of pull this across. I'm going to work our way back into there too. Like I say, sometimes that one gets left out and forgotten. Okay, just lay that color on there. All of the colors that you've mixed. Now we'll take some blue. You almost end up using everything that you've used before. Some blue, you can go on into your yellow ochre mix. Put some of that on. Oh boy. You can just lay this on. This just goes on, kind of drag it around. A few more of these extended into here. Work in some of your lavenders, even your darker greens. See how that breaks that up, makes that really nice and rocky. A little bit of the darker green area. Okay, now we need some light right at the very top. You can use your off-white. You may want to even mix up a little bit of a, well, let's use our yellow. That will make it even more glowing. Right at the very top there. Just to get that light coming right in on the path. You can work some of this in here, a little bit darker right over into the area under our grass. Now we'll take the number 10 sable flat, highlight the very sides of these trees, kind of where the sun's going to catch them. I've got the yellow ochre mix, a little bit of highlight in here. Ooh, there. When you get those highlights on, that's really going to bring that sun around those trees. Right up into the branches. You can highlight maybe this side of this one in here. Now just take kind of a double check on here. We may want to do a few more little finishing touches. A little bit of texture in this area. Maybe a little bit more in our path. A little bit more dark maybe. Right in here. Just kind of lay that on there. You really don't have to be really particular or specific. Enough to give it kind of a rocky feel. Now, how does that look? Maybe a little bit more dark right in here. I'm kind of running out of dark. I may even grab a little bit of this umber. Okay, there we go. Now, I want you to look at the finished painting. The mood of a painting is so important. It touches something inside you. By creating a painting, you can always have that place, that mood close to you, accessible when you need it. The Misty Green Forest gives you that peaceful place of retreat from a busy world. I hope this painting has helped you discover some new techniques and has been enjoyable for you. You may also enjoy other paint by video projects in this series, which include the Golden Quaking Aspen, Mountain in the Pines, Sunset Seascape, and the Country Field and Barn. This is Kendra Burton. Thanks again. Bye.